Farnese is a sadomasochist at the beginning of her story, and her deep erotic fixation with pain and punishment and violence creates one of the most bizarre and grotesque scenes in all of Berserk. On the night when Farnese meets Guts for the very first time, he kidnaps her on horseback, and the two of them ride through the darkness as demons pursue them for hours. But then at one point, Farnese causes the horse to crash as a result of her struggle to escape captivity. And although she initially intends to flee from Guts on foot, she soon discovers to her horror that she cannot run away, because the two of them have been encircled by demons who plan to deliver her to a fate far worse than anything her captor could ever dream of. And so Farnese resigns herself to her situation, and she watches with terror as Guts single-handedly beats back a demonic army. And toward the end of this conflict, as the demonic horde finally seems to be thinning out with the approach of dawn, a lone demon sneaks up on Farnese, and it suddenly takes possession of her soul. It begins to control her movements, and Farnese approaches Guts under its influence and makes a disturbing request. She straddles his sword completely nude, and she asks Guts to use it to split her open. And this request very clearly has sexual overtones. Farnese looks upon Guts' sword like a symbolic substitute for the phallus, and she essentially asks Guts to use his phallus to destroy her. And on the surface of this entire grotesque situation, it may initially seem like Farnese is technically not the person who is making this request. Because, as you may recall, she has been possessed by a demon. She's acting under its influence. So you might be tempted to think that it's really just the demon who's acting here and forcing Farnese to do things that are contrary to her character. But I don't think that that's the right interpretation. See, in the world of Berserk, demons do not drive human behavior in the way, for example, that people drive cars. The way that demons influence human behavior is far more indirect and insidious. What they actually do is peer into the soul of their human victims, and they identify their deepest and most horrible forbidden desires. These are desires that people try to suppress and disavow. People often cannot even admit to themselves that they have them. And when a demon takes possession of a human being, it essentially unleashes these desires. It disables the psychological mechanisms that we normally use to suppress our forbidden urges. And so, when Farnese approaches Guts completely nude and asks him to split her open with his sword, there's a way in which she's revealing her true self despite the fact that she is under a demon's control. Or rather, to be more precise, it's precisely because of the fact that the demon controls her. The demon reveals a secret sadomasochism that sleeps at the center of her psyche, and which fills her with a kind of perverse erotic pleasure at the idea of drawing blood and mutilating the body both of herself and others. But this is actually not the first time that we have seen Farnese's secret sadomasochism express itself in her behavior. It also happened a few hours earlier, shortly before nightfall, when Farnese was still holding Guts as a prisoner in her camp before he escaped and kidnapped her on horseback. Farnese had put Guts in chains and was interrogating him in her quarters, and she ordered her attendants to leave so she could have him all to herself. And then she whipped him again and again with a cathartic intensity. Farnese was trying to break Guts' spirit. She was trying to beat him into submission because she viewed him as a heretical antichrist type of figure, and it was her duty to break him, for she was the leader of a holy inquisition. And that is actually a crucial component to Farnese's taste for sadomasochism. See, Farnese does not enjoy pain all by itself. What she really enjoys is the idea of inflicting pain as punishment, or rather as divine punishment. She sees herself as the vessel and dispenser of God's wrath in her capacity as the leader of a holy inquisition, and she is intoxicated with the feelings of domination that this role affords her. And when she was interrogating Guts in her quarters, she was trying to secure his submission in the name of God, and the pleasure she took in drawing his blood was premised on the idea that she was dominating a savage evil with the power and license of God. But during this interrogation, Farnese ultimately proved too weak to secure this intoxicating submission that she desired from Guts. She whipped him and slapped him around and threatened him with death, but Guts only laughed in her face. He refused to obey her directives or confess to his heresy, and he even ridiculed the weakness of her god. And this total rebuke of Farnese's power filled her with a mix of rage and humiliation. She was frustrated because she could not secure the catharsis that she desired from the mutilation of Guts' flesh. For Guts' will was stronger than his flesh. He could not be made to submit to Farnese's authority by any amount of blood or pain. And that was the reason why Farnese would turn her whip on herself after she dismissed Guts and sent him back to his cell. She flagellated herself as punishment in the name of God on account of her failure to secure Guts' submission. And as the demons would later force her to acknowledge, this self-flagellation possessed an element of masturbatory catharsis. Farnese drew sadistic pleasure from the blood of her own flesh as a substitute for the pleasure that she could not draw from the flesh of Guts. And I cannot emphasize enough how important this turn of events was to the overall arc of Farnese's story in Berserk. Farnese already had a history of inflicting pain on the men that she secretly loved. We see this, for example, in her relationship to Serpico. But now something different was happening with Guts. He caused Farnese to turn her bloodlust inwards, to direct it toward herself, to seek her catharsis in the cutting of her own flesh. And I think this represents a radical transformation in Farnese's world. Up to this point, Farnese believed that she could secure the submission of any and every person in the name of God, for nothing was more powerful than God, and Farnese was his vessel. But Guts was beginning to show Farnese that there are cracks in this idea, for this was a man that her God could not control, could not dominate. And before long, Guts would shatter the authority of Farnese's God altogether. That was what happened when Guts broke free of his imprisonment in Farnese's camp, when he kidnapped Farnese as a hostage on horseback. The two of them fled into the wilderness just as night began to fall, and the cursed brand on Guts' neck began to summon the demons of hell to pursue him once again as they do on every night. It was these very demons that would all at once shatter Farnese's world, for she had never before seen such horrifying creatures. They had never been revealed in her religion, and the power of her God could hardly tolerate the existence of such unimaginable evil. And yet here this evil now existed as an undeniable fact, summoned into being by the Black Swordsman. It was as though a world of darkness had now emerged which had the power to annihilate Farnese's religion, for it proved the utter impotence of her God. And yet, at the same time, Farnese was also bearing witness to another undeniable fact as she shared the company of Guts. She watched as he beat back the demons of hell with a strength that her God could never hope to give any man or woman. It was almost as though Guts possessed a power that was even greater than her God. It was almost as though this man who had shattered her religion was now replacing her God. And this terrifying revelation affected Farnese in the darkest depths of her soul. It very suddenly reorganized the psychological structure of her sadomasochistic fixations. Before Farnese encountered Guts, she had sought delight in the idea of punishing flesh for the sake of God. But now Guts had usurped the power of God, and this engendered in Farnese a new craving to split her flesh for her new god, this Black Swordsman, as a penance for her unforgivable arrogance. And this was the reason why she would make that bizarre and grotesque proposition to Guts, wherein she invited him to split her body open with his sword. This request was the expression of horrifying urges that the demons had brought to the surface of her psyche. These urges called her to enact a symbolic reproduction of the penance that she had committed only a few hours earlier in her private quarters, when in the aftermath of her failed interrogation of Guts, she had secretly whipped herself in cathartic submission to God. But now Guts was her new god, and so Farnese's darkest desires sought out a new catharsis.